I'm Hallie Rodriguez, and at 29 years old, I was still living in the shadow of my perfect sister Victoria. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been dismissed by the people who should love you most, then you'll understand why this one night in Boston changed absolutely everything. And I mean everything. Picture this: my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party. The whole Rodriguez clan gathered in Victoria's $3.2 million mansion in Beacon Hill, the kind of place that screams old money and new success. Victoria, my 38-year-old sister, had outdone herself again. She's the queen of luxury event planning, the woman who orchestrates $8 million galas for tech billionaires and A-list celebrities. Everyone was there: aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, even some of Boston's social elite, all gathered to celebrate Mom and Dad while Victoria basked in her usual spotlight. And there I was, wearing a simple black dress from Target that I'd bought on sale, clutching a $15 bottle of wine that probably cost less than Victoria's nail appointment, trying to blend into the background like I always did. But this time was different. This time, I had a secret that would absolutely shatter their perfect little world. You see, while my family thought I was just some low-level government clerk pushing papers in a cubicle somewhere, I was actually Major Hallie Rodriguez and CIA Special Activities Division. For 8 years, I'd been running covert operations across 4 continents, analyzing threats that could destabilize entire governments, making split-second decisions that literally saved thousands of lives. 3 days before this party, I'd prevented a terrorist attack on the Boston Harbor Tunnel, but I couldn't tell them any of that. My work was classified at levels so high that even most senators had never heard of my unit. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story, this family dysfunction, it goes way deeper than just sibling rivalry. Growing up in our sprawling Cambridge estate, I learned early that I was the other daughter, the consolation prize. My real mother, Elena Rodriguez, died in a horrific car accident when I was just 18 months old. She was a brilliant MIT professor, a woman who could speak 5 languages and had patents in quantum computing. Dad still keeps her photo on his nightstand, and sometimes I catch him staring at it with this look of pure devastation. When I was 3, Dad married Carmen Valdez, a Harvard-educated corporate lawyer who made partner before she turned 30. Carmen was stunning, ambitious, and made it crystal clear from day one which daughter had her favor. It wasn't subtle. It was surgical in its precision. Victoria was already 10 when Carmen entered our lives. This perfect golden child who'd been the center of Dad's universe since Mom died. Victoria was literally everything: valedictorian, prom queen, debate team captain, student body president. The girl who got standing ovations for her high school graduation speech. Her trophies filled not just our living room, but an entire wall of the family den. Her acceptance letter to Stanford wasn't just framed, it was displayed like the Declaration of Independence in our front hallway. Every family dinner was the Victoria show. "Victoria got the lead in the school play," Carmen would announce. "Victoria's essay was selected for the state competition." Dad would beam. "Victoria's been invited to join the National Honor Society." They'd chorus together. And there I'd sit, 8 years old, cutting my chicken into tiny pieces and wondering what I'd have to do to get them to notice me. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some hopeless failure wallowing in self-pity. I was actually brilliant in my own right, just in ways my family couldn't see or didn't value. I had this incredible gift for patterns, for seeing connections that others missed. While Victoria was memorizing Shakespeare, I was building computers from spare parts. While she was winning debate tournaments, I was solving mathematical proofs that college students struggled with. In 7th grade, I built a robot that not only won the state science competition but caught the attention of MIT's engineering department. They actually sent a professor to our house to meet with me. I was 13 years old, and professors from MIT wanted to discuss my potential. You'd think my family would be proud, right? Wrong. I remember rushing home with the trophy and the letter from MIT, practically vibrating with excitement. This was it. This was my moment to shine, to show them I was more than just Victoria's little sister. Carmen glanced at the trophy and said, "That's nice, Hallie. Very technical." Then she immediately turned to Victoria, who'd just gotten an internship at some fancy Boston law firm and spent the next hour gushing about how prestigious and networking-focused it was. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Good job, kiddo," he mumbled, then asked Victoria about her college applications. The MIT letter sat unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally put it in my room, next to my other ignored achievements. That's when I learned that, in the Rodriguez family, there were 2 types of success: Victoria's kind, which mattered, and mine, which didn't. High school was more of the same torture, just with higher stakes. Victoria was at Stanford by then, but her legend lived on. Teachers would look at me and say, "Oh, you're Victoria Rodriguez's sister." She was such a star student. The guidance counselor suggested I apply to more realistic schools than the Ivies Victoria had been courting. Even my friends' parents would ask about Victoria before they asked about me. But here's where my story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. During my junior year, I was volunteering at a community center in Roxbury when I met Colonel Rebecca Steele, a retired Marine who ran a youth leadership program for at-risk kids. She was this tiny woman, maybe 5'2", but she commanded a room like a 4-star general. She'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had more medals than some museums. I was helping with her program when a crisis simulation went wrong. One of the scenarios became real when we discovered an actual gas leak in the building, while everyone else was panicking. I took charge. I analyzed the ventilation system, calculated evacuation routes, coordinated with emergency services, and got 200 people out safely in under 6 minutes. Afterward, Colonel Steele pulled me aside. "Rodriguez," she said, her steel-gray eyes boring into mine. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone your age handle a crisis like that. You've got something special, a strategic mind that most people would kill for. The military could use someone like you, but more than that, I think you need the military." She was right. The military wasn't my backup plan because I couldn't get into Harvard like Victoria. It was my calling. My chance to be around people who valued results over pedigree, who cared about what you could do, not who your sister was. When I told my family I was enlisting after graduation, you'd have thought I announced I was joining a cult. Dad actually dropped his martini, a 30-year-old Macallan that probably cost more than most people's cars. Carmen's perfectly Botoxed face managed to convey complete horror as she said, "Hallie, sweetheart, the military is for people without options. You're not Victoria. But you could still get into a decent state school if you really applied yourself." Victoria, who was home from Stanford for spring break, actually laughed out loud. It wasn't a chuckle or a giggle. It was a full-throated laugh that echoed through our marble foyer. "What are you going to do? March around in the desert carrying a backpack? That's so... you, Hallie, always choosing the path of least resistance." "It's not about resistance," I said quietly. "It's about serving something bigger than myself." "Oh, please." Victoria rolled her eyes. Spare us the patriotic speech. We all know you're just running away because real life is too hard. That night, I made a promise to myself. I was going to become someone who mattered, someone who saved lives and made a difference. And someday, somehow, I was going to make them see exactly who I really was. Basic training at Paris Island nearly destroyed me. The 4 a.m. wake-up calls, the endless drills, the physical exhaustion that left me wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. There were nights I'd lie in my bunk, every muscle screaming, tears streaming down my face, thinking about Victoria's laugh and wondering if she was right. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd remember Colonel Steele's words, "You've got something special," and I'd push through one more day, one more drill, one more impossible challenge. It turns out I didn't just survive basic training, I dominated it. My gift for pattern recognition made me a natural at tactical analysis. My ability to stay calm under pressure made me perfect for high-stress situations. My instructors started pulling me aside, giving me advanced training, recommending me for specialized programs. Rodriguez, my commanding officer, told me after I'd successfully identified and neutralized a mock terrorist threat in record time. You see things that seasoned analysts miss. You think like the enemy, but you fight like an angel. We're fast-tracking you for something bigger. That something bigger turned out to be military intelligence. And then, after 4 years of proving myself over and over again, I got the call that changed everything. An invitation to join the CIA's Special Activities Division. Most people have never heard of SAD. We're the CIA's most elite unit, the ones who handle operations so classified that they officially never happened. We're talking about missions that, if they went public, could start or prevent wars. I spent 3 years in training that makes Navy SEAL preparation look like summer camp, learning skills that most action movie heroes could only dream of. Meanwhile, Victoria's life was playing out like a fairy tale, written by someone who only understood success in terms of Instagram likes and society page mentions. She'd started her own luxury event planning company straight out of Stanford, and within 5 years, she was coordinating events for tech moguls, Hollywood celebrities, and foreign dignitaries. Her client list read like a who's who of the global elite. She married Marcus Thompson, a hedge fund manager whose net worth had more zeros than most people's phone numbers. Their wedding was a 3-day affair in Martha's Vineyard that cost more than most people's houses and made the front page of the Boston Globe's lifestyle section. 1,200 guests, a 40-piece orchestra, celebrity chefs, and a wedding cake that was literally a work of art. Carmen didn't just talk about it for months. She had a coffee table book made about it. 2 years later, Victoria had twins, Sophia and Alexander, who were immediately enrolled in Boston's most exclusive preschool and had trust funds that would make small countries jealous. Carmen proclaimed them little geniuses and started planning their Harvard applications before they could form complete sentences. Every family gathering became a showcase for Victoria's perfect life, the thriving business that had just coordinated a charity gala raising $8 million for children's hospitals. The devoted husband whose fund was featured on the cover of Forbes, the brilliant children who were already reading at grade levels above their age, the stunning $3.2 million mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest. And me? I'd show up fresh from missions I couldn't discuss, wearing clothes from department stores because I was never sure when I'd need to disappear for 6 months, driving a Honda Civic because luxury cars were too memorable for someone in my line of work. Still playing soldier? Hallie? Carmen would ask, with that fake, concerned voice she'd perfected over the years. When are you going to settle down and find something more sustainable? What they didn't know was that I'd just spent 8 months in Eastern Europe, preventing a cyber attack that could have crippled NATO's entire defense network, or that I'd identified a terrorist financing operation that led to the arrest of 23 high-value targets across 3 continents, or that the week before this anniversary party, I'd coordinated an operation that prevented a dirty bomb from being smuggled into Boston Harbor, literally saving their city while they slept peacefully in their mansions. But I couldn't tell them any of that. My security clearance was so high that even mentioning my real job could land me in federal prison. So I sat there, dinner after dinner, family gathering after family gathering, letting them think I was just Hallie the failure, Hallie the one who couldn't measure up, Hallie who'd chosen the easy path and still couldn't make anything of herself. The breaking point came 6 months before this anniversary party. I was sitting in a secure briefing room at Langley, having just received my 3rd commendation for exceptional service, when my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Family dinner Sunday. Try to have something positive to share for once. My fellow operative and closest friend, Rachel Morrison, was sitting across from me reviewing files when she saw my face. "Let me guess," she said, without looking up. "Family drama?" Rachel was one of the few people who knew my whole story. We'd been through hell together on more missions than I could count, and she'd saved my life at least twice that I could remember. She was brilliant, fearless, and had absolutely no patience for people who couldn't see what was right in front of them. "You know what your problem is, Hallie," she said, finally looking up from her files. "You keep going back for more punishment. These people don't deserve to know the badass you've become." I laughed, but it came out bitter and tired. "If I don't show up, it just proves their point. That I can't handle real life. That I'm running away from my responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" Rachel's voice got sharp, the way it did when she was about to destroy someone's argument. "You've saved more lives this year than most people save in a lifetime. You're one of the most decorated operatives in the division. Your threat assessments are required reading for new recruits. The director himself asked for you specifically on the Prague operation. And you're worried about impressing people who think success is measured by how much money you spend on flower arrangements." She was right, but family wounds don't heal just because logic says they should. The 8-year-old girl in me still desperately wanted her father to be proud of her, still wanted Carmen to see her as more than a disappointment, still wanted Victoria to treat her like an equal instead of a charity case. So when the invitation to Mom and Dad's 40th anniversary party arrived, embossed, elegant, everything Victoria touched, I bought a plane ticket to Boston, packed my most conservative clothes, and prepared myself for another night of subtle humiliation. What I didn't expect was that this party would finally give me the chance to show them exactly who I'd become. And what I really didn't expect was that the revelation would come from the most unlikely source imaginable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the party first, because you need to understand just how perfectly orchestrated my humiliation was before you can appreciate how spectacular my vindication became. Victoria's house was more than just a testament to her success. It was a monument to everything I wasn't. The $3.2 million Victorian mansion in Beacon Hill had been completely renovated by architects who specialized in creating homes for billionaires. Every detail screamed wealth and taste: imported Italian marble in the foyer, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, artwork that I was pretty sure I'd seen in museums. The circular driveway looked like a luxury car dealership. Dad's new Mercedes S-Class, Carmen's BMW X7, Uncle Roberto's Porsche Cayenne, Aunt Maria's Tesla Model X, and my rental car, a basic Nissan Altima that looked like the helps vehicle squeezed between all that automotive perfection. Victoria answered the door looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Vogue. Her dress was clearly custom-made, probably costing more than my monthly salary, and her jewelry caught the light in ways that suggested real diamonds rather than the cubic zirconia I was wearing. Her smile was perfect, practiced, the one she used for clients who could afford her $50,000 in planning fee. "Hallie, you made it," she said, air kissing me without actually making contact because God forbid she smudge her makeup. Her eyes did a quick scan of my outfit. A simple navy dress from Ann Taylor Loft and modest jewelry from Target, and I could practically see her mental notes being taken. "Keeping it simple tonight? I see. How? Practical." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared beside her like some kind of Ken doll come to life. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, holding a crystal tumbler filled with what I was sure was top-shelf bourbon. His smile was the kind politicians perfected, all teeth and no warmth. "Hey there, Hal," he said, using the nickname I'd asked him repeatedly not to use. "How's life in... what is it you do again? Something with computers? Or paperwork?" I forced a smile and handed Victoria the bottle of wine I'd brought, a decent Cabernet Sauvignon that had gotten good reviews, but clearly wasn't up to their standards. The wine store clerk had assured me it was excellent for the price range, which now felt like damning with faint praise. "Thanks for having me," I said. "The house looks incredible." Victoria waved dismissively, like she was swatting away a compliment that was too small to matter. "Oh, this old place? We're actually looking at a summer house in Nantucket, 8,000 square feet right on the water. This Boston property is getting a bit cramped for the kind of entertaining we need to do." She gestured around the 6,500 square foot mansion like it was a studio apartment. I followed them into the main living area, and it was like walking into a movie set designed to showcase wealth and success. The guest list was a carefully curated collection of Boston's elite, family members, family friends, Victoria's high-profile clients, Marcus's colleagues from the finance world, and even a few faces I recognized from the society pages. Everyone was dressed to kill. Everyone had stories about their latest successes, their exotic vacations, their children's acceptance into prestigious schools. The conversation was a constant hum of name-dropping and humble bragging, the kind of social orchestra that Victoria conducted like a virtuoso. Carmen spotted me immediately and swept over like a perfumed hurricane. She was wearing a cream-colored designer dress that I was absolutely certain had been custom-made for this specific occasion, and her jewelry caught the light in ways that suggested she'd recently visited her safety deposit box. "Hallie, darling," she exclaimed, though her hug was as perfunctory as Victoria's air kiss. "You look... rested." It was her polite way of saying I looked like I'd gained weight, lost muscle tone, or generally let myself go. Dad joined us a moment later, martini in hand, his silver hair perfectly styled by whatever expensive barber he'd been seeing for the past 20 years. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, but his smile was genuine when he saw me, the one thing that kept me coming back to these family torture sessions. "Good to see you, kiddo," he said, giving me a real hug that reminded me why I loved him despite everything. "How's the government work treating you?" Before I could answer, before I could even attempt to share something meaningful about my life, Carmen jumped in with the precision of a verbal assassin. "Hallie's still figuring things out," she said with that sympathetic tone that made my skin crawl. "Not everyone finds their path as early as Victoria did. Some people need more time to discover themselves." I bit back my response and nodded politely. What was I supposed to say? That I'd found my path just fine? Thank you very much. And it happened to involve protecting national security at the highest levels? That while Victoria was arranging seating charts for charity galas, I was analyzing terrorist communication patterns that could save thousands of lives? that my figuring things out had resulted in commendations signed by people whose names would make headlines if they were revealed? The evening continued in the same vein, each conversation a masterclass in subtle condescension. Uncle Roberto, who owned a chain of successful Italian restaurants throughout New England, clapped me on the shoulder and asked if I was still playing Army. Aunt Maria, who'd built a real estate empire specializing in luxury properties, wanted to know when I was going to settle down and start a real career with growth potential. Cousin Diego, fresh from his latest promotion at a biotech startup that was being courted by venture capitalists, spent 20 minutes detailing his stock options while asking exactly 0 questions about my work. Each interaction felt like a small paper cut, not devastating on its own, but the cumulative effect was slowly bleeding me dry. I found myself retreating to the bathroom twice just to have a moment of peace, staring at myself in Victoria's gold-framed mirror and wondering why I kept subjecting myself to this. Dinner was announced with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for state occasions. Victoria had hired a team of caterers who specialized in events for Boston's social elite, and the formal dining room looked like something out of a magazine. The table was set with china that belonged in a museum, crystal glasses that caught and refracted the light from an elaborate chandelier, and floral arrangements that were clearly the work of someone who charged by the stem. The meal itself was a performance piece: herb-crusted rack of lamb, truffle-infused risotto, vegetables that had been arranged like abstract art. Each course was paired with wine that Marcus introduced with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Victoria stood to give a toast, and the room fell silent with the kind of immediate attention that real power commands. Her voice carried easily across the space as she raised her glass of what was undoubtedly champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries in a month. "To Mom and Dad's 40 years together," she began, her smile radiant and practiced. "It's been an incredible year for our family. My company just coordinated the Morrison Foundation Gala, $8.2 million raised for children's hospitals across New England. Marcus's fund had its best quarter in company history. The twins were both selected for the advanced program at their school, and Sophia's already reading at a 6th grade level." She paused for the murmurs of approval that rippled around the table like a wave. "We're so grateful for all of you being here to celebrate this milestone with us." I noticed she didn't mention me in her litany of family achievements. Not that there was anything she could mention. Of course. My real accomplishments were classified at levels that would make most CIA operatives jealous. But the omission felt deliberate, surgical in its precision. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone as everyone shared their latest triumphs. Uncle Roberto was opening 3 new restaurants, including one in Manhattan that had already gotten a starred review from the Times. Aunt Maria had just closed a deal on a $75 million waterfront development. Cousin Diego's startup was in talks with Google about a potential acquisition that could make him a multimillionaire before his 30th birthday. Everyone had something to brag about, something that proved they were winning at the game of life. Everyone except me. When the conversation finally turned in my direction, it was Aunt Maria who asked the question I'd been dreading all evening. "So, Hallie, what's new with you? Still working for the government?" I nodded, feeling all eyes turned toward me like spotlights. This was my moment, my chance to say something, anything, that might make them see me differently. "Actually, I recently got promoted to—" "Oh, that's nice," Victoria interrupted smoothly, her tone making it crystal clear that whatever promotion I'd received couldn't possibly be significant in the context of real success. Government work is so stable, isn't it? Not everyone is cut out for the uncertainty of the private sector. She smiled around the table like she was being generous and acknowledging my small achievement. The heat crept up my neck like a slow burn as I realized she'd just dismissed my promotion to major, a rank that took most military officers 15 to 20 years to achieve, and which I'd earned at 29, as if it were a participation trophy handed out for showing up. Marcus nodded along sympathetically, swirling his bourbon like he was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. "The thing about government work," he said, clearly feeling qualified to speak as someone who'd never served a day in his life, "is that it's very predictable. You know, following established procedures, implementing policies other people create. Some people really thrive in that kind of structured environment." Carmen jumped in with her own contribution to my professional assassination. "It's wonderful that Hallie found something she's comfortable with. Not everyone has Victoria's entrepreneurial spirit or your business acumen. Marcus, stability is important too." A few people around the table chuckled softly, not mean-spirited exactly, but the kind of polite laughter that accompanies someone else's misfortune. I felt my hands clench under the table, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave marks. 8 years of my life. 8 years of sacrificing everything for my country. Of missing birthdays and holidays and relationships because I was halfway around the world preventing catastrophes that these people would never even know had threatened them. 8 years of carrying secrets that would make their comfortable lives possible, reduced to following established procedures by people who thought success was measured by the size of your investment portfolio. But I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't tell them about Operation Nightfall, where my threat analysis had prevented a terrorist attack on the Boston Marathon, saving thousands of lives, including possibly their own. I couldn't mention the weapons trafficking network I'd helped dismantle, preventing military-grade explosives from reaching domestic terrorists. I couldn't describe the foreign intelligence operatives I'd identified and neutralized before they could steal technology that would have given hostile nations a devastating advantage. I couldn't even hint at the real scope of my responsibilities, the fact that my security clearance was so high that I regularly read briefings that the president himself wouldn't see for weeks. So I sat there, gripping my fork until my knuckles went white, and let them think I was exactly what Victoria said I was, a low-level government employee who'd chosen the safe path and still couldn't make anything remarkable of herself. "The government needs people like that," Victoria continued, clearly on a roll. "Behind-the-scenes work, administrative support, making sure all the paperwork gets filed correctly. It's not glamorous, but someone has to do it." The dinner conversation moved on to more stimulating topics. Victoria's latest celebrity clients. Apparently, she was planning a wedding for a pop star whose name everyone recognized. Marcus's golf handicap, improving, thanks to lessons from a pro who'd coached PGA Tour players. The twins' progress in their private school, both testing off the charts in everything from mathematics to creative writing. I retreated into myself, mechanically eating the perfectly prepared food while counting down the minutes, until I could politely excuse myself and escape back to my hotel room. Each bite tasted like sawdust. Each sip of wine might as well have been vinegar. I was trapped in a performance where everyone else knew their lines, and I was left improvising my way through a role I didn't want to play. But then something unexpected happened. Something that would change the trajectory of this entire evening in ways that none of us could have predicted. The doorbell rang. Victoria frowned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drawing together in an expression of mild annoyance. She set down her wine glass with the kind of precision that suggested she didn't like surprises, especially ones that interrupted her carefully orchestrated events. "That's odd," she said, glancing toward Marcus. "We're not expecting anyone else. The caterers finished an hour ago, and everyone on the guest list is already here." Marcus stood up, smoothing his tie with the automatic gesture of someone who was always ready to present himself properly. "I'll check who it is. Probably just a delivery or something." The conversation continued around the table, but I noticed Victoria looked more than mildly annoyed at the interruption to her perfect evening. This was supposed to be her moment, her showcase. And uninvited guests were definitely not part of the script. A few minutes later, Marcus returned, but his expression wasn't the calm confidence he'd left with. He looked puzzled, maybe even a little concerned, and he moved directly to Victoria's chair to whisper in her ear. "Victoria," he said quietly, though not quietly enough to prevent the people sitting nearby from hearing. "There's someone at the door. Military officer. Says he needs to speak with Hallie urgently." Every conversation at the table stopped as if someone had hit a pause button. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Wine glasses froze in mid-sip. And all eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity, to something that might have been concern. I was just as bewildered as they were. Nobody from my unit knew I was here. My location was carefully compartmentalized for security reasons, and I certainly hadn't told anyone I'd be at a family gathering in Boston. More importantly, nobody would show up unannounced unless something catastrophic was happening. The kind of catastrophic that could affect national security. My mind immediately went to threat assessment mode. Had something happened that required my immediate attention? Was there an active operation that needed my expertise? Or worse, had my cover been blown somehow, putting not just me but potentially my entire family at risk? Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, and my blood went cold. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison appeared in the doorway to Victoria's dining room, and the air in the room seemed to change density. He was in full dress uniform, not the casual military attire someone might wear to run errands, but the formal dress blues reserved for the most official occasions. Every medal and ribbon was perfectly placed, every crease sharp enough to cut glass. His bearing radiating the kind of authority that came with 25 years of distinguished service in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. This was a man who briefed cabinet secretaries, who had direct access to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who commanded respect in the highest levels of government and intelligence. He was my direct supervisor at CIA, the person who decided which operations I was cleared for, whose signature determined whether I got promoted or transferred or assigned to missions that officially didn't exist. And he was standing in my sister's dining room, looking directly at me with an expression that was all business. "Major Rodriguez," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. His salute was crisp, perfect, unmistakable in its significance. The kind of salute that acknowledged not just rank, but exceptional service. "Apologies for the interruption. Ma'am, I need to brief you on a situation that requires your immediate expertise." The silence in the room was so complete that I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantelpiece, could hear someone's sharp intake of breath, could hear the soft clink of someone setting down a fork on expensive china with trembling hands. Victoria's mouth had fallen open in a way that would have horrified her if she'd realized it. Marcus looked like someone had just told him his hedge fund had evaporated overnight. Carmen's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock that was spreading across her face like a wave. Dad was staring at me like I'd just transformed into someone he'd never seen before in his life. I stood up slowly, my training overriding the surreal nature of the situation. 8 years of military discipline kicked in, and I returned his salute with the precision that had been drilled into me through countless exercises and real-world operations. "Colonel Harrison," I replied, my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was racing. "This is highly irregular, sir." "Indeed it is, Major." But when the deputy director of operations calls personally and says he needs our best analyst on a developing situation, protocol becomes secondary to national security. His eyes swept the room, taking in the shocked faces around Victoria's dining table, and I caught the briefest hint of satisfaction in his expression. Then he said something that I knew would echo in this room long after he left. I should mention, for the benefit of your family, that Major Rodriguez just completed Operation Silver Eagle, a counterterrorism operation that prevented what our intelligence indicates would have been the most devastating attack on American soil since 9/11. Her strategic analysis identified a cell that had been planning coordinated strikes on critical infrastructure in 6 major cities, including Boston. The operation she coordinated resulted in the arrest of 23 high-value targets and the seizure of enough explosive material to level several city blocks. Uncle Roberto made a choking sound that might have been an attempt to speak. Aunt Maria's wine glass slipped from her fingers, the expensive crystal shattering on Victoria's imported marble floor like her preconceptions about her youngest niece. "Major?" Dad whispered, his voice barely audible above the ringing silence. Colonel Harrison's expression remained professional, but I could see the deliberate intent behind his words. "Major Rodriguez is one of our most valuable assets in the intelligence community. Her work in counterterrorism and threat analysis has been instrumental in preventing multiple attacks on American soil. She holds security clearances that most government officials will never achieve, and her threat assessments are considered essential reading for operatives across multiple agencies." He paused, letting that sink in, then delivered the final blow to their assumptions. "The president himself has commended her service on 3 separate occasions." Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Hallie, you're a major? In the CIA?" I met her eyes, seeing my sister, really seeing her, for perhaps the first time in years. The smugness was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like dawning understanding mixed with absolute horror at what she'd just spent the entire evening doing to someone who'd been preventing terrorist attacks while she planned charity galas. "Yes," I said simply, my voice carrying in the silence. "I am." And in that moment, everything changed. Everything. The silence that followed my simple, "Yes, I am," stretched across Victoria's dining room like a fault line before an earthquake. I could literally watch my family's understanding of reality crumble in real time. Dad's martini glass hung frozen halfway to his lips, the olive speared on its tiny sword trembling slightly. Carmen's perfectly composed face had gone completely slack, her Botox unable to hide the shock that was radiating from her eyes. Uncle Roberto was making these small choking sounds, like he was trying to process words that his brain refused to accept. But it was Victoria's face that I'll remember forever. For the first time in my entire life, my perfect sister looked completely, utterly lost. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. The woman who could command a room of Boston's elite, who could coordinate events for heads of state, who always had the perfect response ready. She had nothing. Colonel Harrison stood in the doorway like a statue of military precision, letting the weight of his words sink in. He wasn't just destroying their assumptions about me, he was systematically dismantling 30 years of family mythology with surgical precision. "Perhaps I should clarify the scope of Major Rodriguez's recent work," he continued, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made senators sit up straighter. 3 weeks ago, she identified a terrorist cell operating out of Montreal that was planning coordinated attacks on infrastructure targets in 6 American cities, including Boston's financial district. Her analysis prevented what our intelligence estimates suggest would have been the deadliest attack on American soil since September 11th. Aunt Maria made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The shattered crystal from her wineglass sparkled on Victoria's marble floor like fallen stars, and I realized it was the perfect metaphor for this moment, something beautiful and expensive broken beyond repair. The operation Major Rodriguez coordinated, Colonel Harrison continued relentlessly, resulted in the simultaneous arrest of 23 high-value targets across 3 countries. She personally designed the communication intercept strategy that allowed us to map their entire network. The President of the United States has personally commended her service on 3 separate occasions. The President? Dad's voice came out as barely a whisper. Yes, sir. Most recently, 2 months ago, when Major Rodriguez's threat assessment prevented a cyber attack that could have crippled the eastern seaboard's power grid. She identified the attack vector 48 hours before it was scheduled to execute. Without her intervention, we're looking at potential casualties in the hundreds of thousands, economic damage in the tens of billions. I watched Marcus's face go through about 5 different expressions as he tried to process this information. The man who thought success was measured by quarterly profits and golf handicaps was trying to wrap his head around the fact that the woman he'd just dismissed as a paper pusher had prevented a catastrophe that would have made his hedge fund's worst day look like a rounding error. I should also mention, Colonel Harrison added, and I could see the slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth, that Major Rodriguez holds the highest security clearance available to operational personnel. She regularly briefs cabinet-level officials on threats to national security. Her work is classified at levels that most government employees will never achieve clearance to access. Carmen finally found her voice, though it came out strangled and small. Hallie, why didn't you... How could we not know? Before I could answer, Colonel Harrison spoke again. Ma'am, that's exactly the point. Major Rodriguez's work requires absolute operational security. The fact that you didn't know what she does is proof that she's exceptional at it. In our business, invisibility isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. And there it was. The word that perfectly captured everything I'd been trying to explain to my family for years, invisibility. They'd seen it as my failure to shine, my inability to measure up to Victoria's blazing success. But in my world, being invisible meant being so good at what you do that no one ever knows you were there until it's too late for the bad guys. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. My family had spent years making me feel invisible because they thought I was insignificant. But I'd built a career on being invisible because I was too significant for anyone to know I existed. Victoria was the first to break the stunned silence. And when she spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. Hallie, I had no idea. All this time, I thought... You thought I was a failure, I said simply, not angry anymore, just tired. You thought I'd given up, taken the easy path, settled for mediocrity. You've been thinking that for 8 years. 8 years, she repeated, like she was tasting the words and finding them bitter. 8 years of me treating you like you were less than, like I was nothing. I finished for her, like my life didn't matter, like what I did was so insignificant that it wasn't even worth asking about. Dad set his martini down with shaking hands. Kiddo, Jesus, I'm so sorry. We're all so sorry. We had no idea what you were doing, what you were sacrificing. Sacrificing? I almost laughed, but it came out hollow. Dad, I wasn't sacrificing anything. I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. I found my calling. I got really good at it. And I've been saving lives while you all decided I was the family disappointment. Colonel Harrison checked his watch, a subtle reminder that this wasn't just a family drama playing out. This was a working CIA officer who had responsibilities that superseded dinner party dynamics. Major Rodriguez, he said formally, I do need to brief you tonight. The situation has developed some urgency, however, and here his tone softened just slightly. I recognize this is a significant moment for your family. Would 15 minutes be sufficient to address the immediate situation here? I looked around the table at faces that I'd known my entire life. Faces that were looking at me like they were seeing me for the first time. 15 minutes to unpack 30 years of family dysfunction, to explain a career they'd never bothered to understand, to bridge a gap that had seemed unbridgeable just moments before. 15 minutes should be plenty, I said. Colonel Harrison nodded crisply. I'll wait in my vehicle. Ma'am. He saluted me one more time, a gesture that made Uncle Roberto actually flinch, and then he was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt completely different from the one that had preceded his arrival. This silence wasn't shocked or stunned. It was the silence of people who suddenly realized they'd been having the wrong conversation for decades. Victoria was the first to speak, and when she did, her voice was thick with something I'd never heard from her before. Genuine remorse. Hallie, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. We all do, but especially me. God, I've been such a bitch to you. For years. And you've been out there saving the world while I've been planning parties and acting like I was better than you. You weren't acting, I said quietly. You genuinely believed you were better than me. And to be fair, from your perspective, you had every reason to think that. You couldn't see what I was really doing, so you filled in the blanks with your own assumptions. Marcus cleared his throat, and when he spoke, all the condescension was gone from his voice. Hallie, I don't even know what to say. All those times I called you Hal and asked about your computer work. Jesus, I feel like such an ass. You should, I said, but not unkindly. But feeling like an ass and learning from it are two different things. Carmen was crying now, actual tears that were going to ruin her makeup, which for Carmen was basically the equivalent of a complete emotional breakdown. Hallie, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I thought you needed guidance, needed direction. I thought you were lost. I was never lost, I said. And for the first time, I felt the truth of those words settling into my bones. I always knew exactly where I was going. The problem was that where I was going looked like nowhere to all of you. Dad reached across the table and grabbed my hand. The first real physical contact we'd had in months that wasn't a perfunctory hug at the beginning or end of a family gathering. Kiddo, I'm so proud of you. I should have said that years ago. I should have trusted that you knew what you were doing. Should have asked more questions. Should have been a better father. And there it was. The words I'd been waiting to hear my entire life, finally spoken in a moment when I realized I didn't need them anymore. It was like finally getting a toy you'd wanted as a child, long after you'd outgrown playing with toys. Dad, you're not a bad father. You're just a father who didn't understand what his daughter was doing with her life. There's a difference. Uncle Roberto, who'd been unusually quiet through all of this, finally found his voice. Hallie, all those times I asked if you were still playing soldier? Christ, I feel like an idiot. You've been protecting all of us, haven't you? Protecting the whole country. That's the job, I said simply. That's what we do. Most of the time. The best outcome is that nothing happens and nobody ever knows why. Aunt Maria, who was still staring at the broken crystal on the floor like it held the secrets of the universe, looked up at me with tears in her eyes. All those family dinners where we talked about our achievements, our successes, our careers, and you couldn't say anything about yours? Not a word, I confirmed. Do you know how many times I wanted to tell you all exactly what I was doing? How many times I wanted to explain that my job wasn't filing paperwork or following orders, but making decisions that could affect millions of people? But I couldn't. My security clearance means that most of my life is classified. The people I work with, the places I go, the things I do. None of it can be discussed outside of secure facilities. Victoria was shaking her head slowly, like she was trying to dislodge a thought that had gotten stuck. All those charity galas I plan, all those fundraisers, I thought I was doing important work. I thought I was making a difference. You are making a difference, I said, and I meant it. Raising $8 million for children's hospitals, that matters. Victoria, that saves lives too, just in a different way. The difference is that your work gets recognition, gets celebrated, gets written up in magazines. Mine gets classified and buried in files that won't be declassified for 50 years. But your work is more important, she said quietly. I thought about that for a moment. Is it? Those children's hospitals you raised money for, they'll save thousands of lives over the next decade. The cancer research, the pediatric surgery units, the equipment that money will buy, that's real, tangible good in the world. My work prevents bad things from happening, but your work makes good things happen. They're different kinds of important. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. The scale of what I'd prevented, the terrorist attacks, the cyber attacks, the threats that could have killed hundreds of thousands of people, that was a different magnitude of impact. But Victoria needed to hear that her work mattered too, and the truth was, it did matter. Just not in the same way. Cousin Diego, who'd been silent through most of this exchange, finally spoke up. Hallie, all those times I talked about my startup, my stock options. God, I must have sounded like such a small-time player. You sounded like someone who was proud of their work. I said, there's nothing wrong with that. Success comes in different forms. Diego, your biotech company might develop treatments that save lives. That matters too. I looked around the table at these people I'd known my entire life, people who were suddenly seeing me clearly for the first time. It was strange how different they looked when they weren't looking down at me. Uncle Roberto seemed smaller somehow, less sure of himself. Aunt Maria looked almost fragile, which was not a word I'd ever associated with her before. Carmen looked like someone who'd just realized she'd been wearing the wrong prescription glasses for years and was seeing the world in focus for the first time. And Victoria. Victoria looked like someone who'd built her entire identity on being the successful sister, only to discover that success was more complicated than she'd ever imagined. There's something else you all need to understand, I said, checking my own watch and realizing that Colonel Harrison's 15 minutes were almost up. What just happened here, this revelation, this moment, it can't leave this room. Ever. The fact that you now know what I really do for a living makes you all potential security risks. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowledge like this makes you targets. The implications of that statement settled over the room like a cold fog. These people who just learned that their family member was some kind of real-life superhero were now being told that knowing this information put them in danger. What kind of targets? Marcus asked. And for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely afraid. The kind where hostile intelligence services might try to use you to get to me, I said bluntly. The kind where terrorists might try to leverage you for information about my work. The kind where your phones might get tapped, your emails monitored, your movements tracked. the kind where casual conversations about family could become intelligence gold mines for people who want to hurt this country. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. This one was heavy with understanding, with the weight of responsibility they'd never asked for. "So what does that mean for us?" Dad asked. "For our family?" "It means we can never talk about my work again," I said. "Not here. Not on the phone. Not in emails. Not anywhere that isn't a secure facility. It means you go back to thinking of me as someone who works for the government doing classified things you can't know about. The difference is that now you know those classified things are important, even if you can't know what they are." "But we'll know," Victoria said quietly. "Even if we can't talk about it, we'll know who you really are." "Yes," I said. "You'll know, and maybe that's enough." A knock on the front door reminded me that Colonel Harrison's patience, while considerable, wasn't infinite. I stood up from the table, straightening my simple Target dress, a piece of clothing that suddenly felt like armor instead of a disguise. "I have to go," I said. "There's a situation that needs my attention, and when the Deputy Director of Operations calls personally, you don't keep him waiting." Dad stood up too, and for a moment I thought he was going to try to hug me goodbye. Instead, he did something that surprised me. He extended his hand for a formal handshake. "Major Rodriguez," he said, and his voice carried a respect I'd never heard before. "It's been an honor." I shook his hand, feeling the strange formality of the moment. This wasn't Dad saying goodbye to his daughter. This was a civilian saying goodbye to a military officer. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. Carmen was next, and she was still crying when she took my hand in both of hers. "Stay safe, sweetheart, and thank you for everything you do that we'll never know about." Uncle Roberto clapped me on the shoulder, but gently, like he was afraid I might disappear if he pressed too hard. "Take care of yourself, Major, and thank you for taking care of all of us." Aunt Maria just nodded, still overwhelmed by the evening's revelations. Cousin Diego gave me a handshake that was firm and respectful, a far cry from the casual dismissiveness he'd shown earlier. But it was Victoria who surprised me the most. Instead of a handshake or a hug, she saluted me. It was clumsy and unpracticed. She was clearly not military, but it was sincere in a way that made my throat tight. "Major Rodriguez," she said formally, then switched back to her normal voice. "Hallie, I'm sorry it took me 30 years to see you. I'm sorry it took a CIA colonel showing up at your dinner party for you to believe me," I replied. She laughed, but it was shaky and full of tears. "Fair enough." I walked toward the front door, leaving behind a dining room full of people who would never look at me the same way again. It should have felt like a victory. This moment of finally being seen and recognized and respected by my family. And part of it did feel like victory, but mostly, it felt like an ending. Because the truth was, I didn't need their recognition anymore. I'd spent so many years craving their approval, so many family dinners feeling diminished by their casual dismissal, so many nights wondering what I'd have to do to make them see me as valuable. But somewhere in the journey from that ignored 13-year-old with an MIT letter to the CIA major who prevented terrorist attacks, I'd stopped needing their validation. I'd found my worth in other places, in Colonel Steele's belief in my potential, in my fellow operatives' trust, in the knowledge that my work made a real difference in the world. Their recognition was nice. Their apologies were appreciated. But I'd already proven my value to the people whose opinions actually mattered, my colleagues, my superiors, and most importantly, myself. Colonel Harrison was waiting by his vehicle, a black SUV that screamed government to anyone who knew what to look for. As I approached, he opened the passenger door for me with military courtesy. "How did that go, Major?" he asked as I settled into the leather seat. "About as well as could be expected, sir," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "They're processing some significant new information about their family dynamics." He started the engine and pulled out of Victoria's circular driveway, navigating between the luxury cars that belonged to people who just had their understanding of success completely recalibrated. "For what it's worth," he said as we headed toward downtown Boston. I enjoyed that more than I probably should have. It's not often we get to remind civilians what real service looks like. I looked out the window at the city lights of Boston. My city. The place I'd been protecting without anyone knowing, including my own family. "Is there really an urgent situation that needs my attention, sir? Or was this your way of giving me a dramatic exit?" Colonel Harrison was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. "There's always an urgent situation that needs your attention, Major. That's the nature of our work. But I'll admit, the timing of this particular briefing was flexible." "How did you even know where I was tonight?" "Major Morrison may have mentioned that you were attending a family gathering where your relatives were under the impression that you filed paperwork for a living. She suggested that perhaps a reminder of your actual value might be educational." Rachel. Of course it was Rachel. My brilliant, protective, absolutely unsubtle best friend who couldn't stand to watch me get torn down by people who should have been building me up. "I'm going to have to thank her," I said. "You're going to have to do more than thank her," Colonel Harrison replied. "She's part of tonight's actual briefing. We've got a situation developing in Prague that requires both your analytical skills and her operational expertise. Wheels up in 6 hours. Prague. I'd been there twice before. Both times for operations that had required months of planning and left scars that still ached when the weather changed. If they were sending Rachel and me back to Prague with 6 hours' notice, something big was happening. "What's the threat level?" I asked, already shifting into operational mode. "Significant. We've intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated attack on NATO infrastructure. The pattern analysis is similar to the Montreal cell you just dismantled, but the scale appears to be much larger." Of course it was. There was always another threat. Always another group of people who wanted to hurt innocent civilians. Always another puzzle that needed solving before people died. It never ended, this work. But that was also what made it matter. As we drove through the streets of Boston, past the harbor I'd helped protect, past the financial district that might have been rubble if not for my work, past thousands of people who were safe because they'd never know my name, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with my family's newfound understanding. This was who I was. This was what I did. And tomorrow, I'd get on a plane to Prague and do it again, because that's what Major Hallie Rodriguez of the CIA Special Activities Division did. She saved the world, one classified operation at a time, while the people she protected lived their lives in blissful ignorance of how close they'd come to disaster. My family finally knew who I was. But more importantly, I'd never forgotten. The black SUV disappeared into the Boston night, carrying me toward my next mission, my next chance to be invisible in all the ways that mattered. Behind me, in a $3.2 million mansion in Beacon Hill, 9 people sat around a dinner table trying to process the fact that the woman they'd dismissed as a failure was actually one of the most important people they'd never known they'd met. And somewhere in Langley, Virginia, Rachel Morrison was probably grinning as she packed her gear for Prague, satisfied that she'd finally given her best friend the recognition she deserved. Some victories are public. celebrated with champagne and newspaper headlines and social media posts. Others happen in dining rooms, in the space between one understanding and another, in the moment when people realize they've been looking at everything wrong. I preferred the second kind. They were quieter, more personal, and they didn't compromise operational security. Plus, they came with the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the underestimated person in the room turns out to be the most dangerous one there. And that's exactly how I liked it. 6 hours after my family finally saw me for who I really was, I was on a military transport plane cutting through the darkness above the Atlantic, heading toward Prague with Rachel Morrison and a team of CIA operatives who'd become closer to me than blood relatives ever had. The contrast wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 30 years trying to get my family to understand my worth. And here I was with people who'd trusted me with their lives, without hesitation. Rachel was sitting across from me in the dimly lit cargo hold, reviewing mission files on her encrypted tablet. Even in tactical gear and body armor, she looked like she could walk into a boardroom and take over a corporation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that made hostile operatives underestimate her exactly once. "So," she said without looking up from her screen, "how'd it feel to finally drop the mic on your family?" I laughed quietly, checking my own equipment for the third time. "You're absolutely insane. You know that? Sending Colonel Harrison to Victoria's dinner party? What if he'd blown my cover completely?" "Your cover was already blown," Rachel replied, finally looking up with that mischievous grin that usually meant trouble. They just didn't know it yet. Besides, Harrison owed me a favor from that mess in Budapest last year. And you needed someone to remind your sister that planning charity galas doesn't make her a strategic genius. Rachel Morrison, International Woman of Mystery and Family Therapist, I said, shaking my head. You should add that to your LinkedIn profile. If I had a LinkedIn profile, it would just say, travel consultant and problem solver, she shot back. Much more accurate than anything your family thought you did. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and I instinctively checked that my gear was secure. After 8 years of flying into hostile territory, certain responses become automatic. Rachel noticed the movement and nodded approvingly. We'd trained together long enough that we could read each other's tactical instincts like a language. "Speaking of problems that need solving," she said, her tone shifting to business, "let me brief you on what we're walking into in Prague." She turned her tablet so I could see the satellite imagery and communication intercepts that had landed us on this plane. The photos showed a series of buildings in Prague's Newtown district. Innocuous-looking apartment complexes and small businesses that could have been anywhere in Eastern Europe. But the pattern recognition software had identified something that made my blood run cold. "These are the same architectural modifications we saw in Montreal," I said, studying the images. Hidden antenna arrays, reinforced basements, power grid connections that don't match the building's supposed usage. Exactly. And the communication patterns are nearly identical to the cell you just dismantled. Same encryption methods, same operational timing, same target selection methodology. Rachel swiped to show me a map of potential targets across Europe. But the scale is bigger, much bigger. The map showed red dots scattered across major European cities: London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Madrid, Amsterdam. Each dot represented critical infrastructure: power plants, transportation hubs, financial centers, government buildings, the kind of targets that, if hit simultaneously, could cripple the entire European economy and NATO's defensive capabilities. "How many operatives are we looking at?" I asked, though I was already running calculations in my head based on the target spread. "Conservative estimate, 40 to 50 active cells across 6 countries. Each cell is small, 3 to 5 operatives, but they're coordinated by a central command structure that we haven't been able to penetrate. Rachel pulled up another screen showing communication flows. Until now. She showed me the breakthrough that had prompted this urgent mission. One of the operatives from the Montreal cell, during interrogation, had revealed a communication protocol that used a specific frequency rotation. It was subtle, almost undetectable unless you knew exactly what to look for. But it was the thread that could unravel the entire network. The problem is, Rachel continued, we only have about 18 hours before they realize their Montreal operation has been compromised and change all their protocols. After that, they go dark, and we're back to square one while they execute whatever they're planning. Which is why we're flying into Prague instead of taking the time for proper surveillance and planning, I said, understanding the impossible timeline we were working under. Exactly. This is a one-shot opportunity, and if we blow it, we're looking at potential casualties in the hundreds of thousands and economic damage that could trigger a global recession. I stared at the mission parameters scrolling across Rachel's screen. 18 hours to identify, locate, and neutralize a terrorist network that had been years in the making. No backup plan, no second chances, no room for error. It was the kind of mission that could define a career, or end it. What's our operational support? I asked. Minimal. Czech intelligence is providing local coordination, but they don't know the full scope of what we're after. As far as they're concerned, we're tracking down some mid-level arms dealers. We can't risk a leak that might spook the network into early activation. So it's just us? Just us. Plus a 4-person tactical team that's already in Prague, setting up surveillance. But the analytical work, the pattern recognition, the communication intercepts, the target identification, that's all you. I'm there to keep you alive while you do the thinking. It was a familiar dynamic. Rachel was one of the best field operatives in the CIA, capable of handling herself in any situation from diplomatic cocktail parties to urban firefights. I was the analyst who could see patterns that others missed, who could take seemingly unrelated pieces of information and construct a complete picture of enemy operations. Together, we'd prevented more catastrophes than either of us could count. There's something else, Rachel said, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. The Prague network isn't just planning attacks. According to the intelligence we've gathered, they're planning to use them as a distraction. A distraction from what? That's what you need to figure out. Because whatever the real target is, it's big enough that they're willing to sacrifice 40 cells and years of preparation just to draw attention away from it. The implications of that hit me like a physical blow. Terrorist networks didn't sacrifice major operations lightly. If they were willing to use coordinated attacks across 6 European countries as a distraction, then the real target had to be something that would make those attacks look like minor incidents by comparison. How long until we land? I asked, my mind already shifting into operational mode. 2 hours. We'll have a secure communication setup waiting, plus access to all the intelligence databases we need. The Czech team has been monitoring the Prague cells for 48 hours, so we'll have real-time surveillance data to work with. I nodded, settling back into my seat to review the files one more time. This was what I lived for. The moment when all the training, all the analysis, all the years of invisible work came together in a mission that could change everything. The adrenaline was already starting to build. That familiar combination of excitement and terror that came with operations where failure wasn't an option. Hey, Hallie, Rachel said quietly, interrupting my review of the target data. Yeah? For what it's worth, I'm glad your family finally knows who you really are. You've been carrying that weight for too long. I looked at her, this woman who'd seen me at my best and worst, who'd trusted me with her life more times than either of us could count, who'd orchestrated an elaborate dinner party intervention because she couldn't stand to watch me be diminished by people who should have supported me. Thanks, I said simply, for everything. The dinner party thing was completely insane, but it worked. She finished with a grin. Sometimes insane is exactly what the situation calls for. Speaking of which, this Prague operation is probably going to qualify as insane too. The best ones usually do. The plane began its descent toward Prague, and I could see the lights of the city spread out below us like a circuit board in the darkness. Somewhere down there, in apartments and safe houses and hidden facilities, a terrorist network was preparing to execute an operation that could reshape the geopolitical landscape of Europe. They had years of preparation, dozens of operatives, and the advantage of choosing when and where to strike. We had 18 hours, incomplete intelligence, and a team small enough to fit in a single van. But we also had something they didn't expect: me. And after 30 years of being underestimated, I was ready to show them exactly what that meant. As the plane touched down at a military airfield outside Prague, I was already running scenarios in my head, looking for the patterns that would reveal their true purpose. Rachel was right. This was going to be insane. I couldn't wait. The safe house in Prague looked like every other CIA operational facility I'd ever worked in, nondescript from the outside, fortress-like security within, and packed with enough surveillance and communication equipment to run a small war. The building was a converted warehouse in the Karlin district, chosen for its proximity to the suspected terrorist cells and its excellent sightlines for surveillance. Rachel and I were met by Agent Sarah Chen, a compact woman in her early 30s who radiated the kind of calm competence that came from years of dangerous work. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing as she briefed us on the situation. "We've identified 3 primary cells operating in Prague," she said, leading us to a wall covered with surveillance photos, maps, and communication intercepts. Cell Alpha is based in Newtown, near the main train station. Cell Beta is operating out of an apartment complex in Vinohrady. Cell Gamma is the most concerning. They've set up in an industrial area that gives them access to both the airport and the highway system. I studied the photographs of the suspects, committing faces and patterns to memory. They looked ordinary, the kind of people you'd pass on the street without a second glance, which was exactly the point. The most dangerous operatives were always the ones who could disappear into a crowd. "What about their communication patterns?" I asked, settling into a chair in front of multiple computer screens showing real-time surveillance feeds. "That's where it gets interesting," Agent Chen replied, pulling up a series of signal analysis charts. "They're using the frequency rotation protocol you identified from Montreal, but with a twist. They're layering in commercial radio broadcasts and cell phone tower signals to mask their transmissions." I leaned forward, studying the data streams. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Hidden within the normal electronic noise of a modern city, there was a secondary communication network that allowed the cells to coordinate without using traceable digital communications. "This is sophisticated," I said, my respect for their operational security growing. "Someone with serious technical skills designed this system." "Which brings us to the central question," Rachel said, joining us at the monitors. "Who's running this operation? Because this level of coordination and technical sophistication suggests state-level support." That was the million-dollar question. Terrorist networks rarely had the resources or expertise to mount operations this complex without backing from a hostile intelligence service. But identifying which service was behind it would require analyzing patterns that went far beyond the immediate Prague situation. "Let me dig into the communication protocols," I said, pulling up analysis software on one of the computers. If I can map their command structure, we might be able to identify the source. For the next 4 hours, I lost myself in the data. Communication intercepts, surveillance footage, financial transaction records, travel patterns. All of it fed into analytical models that slowly began to reveal the shape of the network. Rachel and Agent Chen coordinated with the tactical team, planning approaches to each of the suspected safe houses. But it was the pattern I found in the communication timing that made everything click into place. "Rachel," I called out, my voice tight with urgency. "You need to see this." She came over to my workstation, where I had multiple screens showing communication analysis and timeline correlations. "What did you find?" "Look at the timing of their transmissions," I said, highlighting specific data points. "They're not just coordinating with each other, they're synchronizing with something else. Something big enough to require precise timing across multiple time zones." Rachel studied the data, her expression growing more serious as she understood the implications. "You're thinking the European attacks are synchronized with something happening elsewhere?" "I'm thinking the European attacks are the distraction, just like you suspected. But look at this timing pattern. They're coordinating with an operation that's happening exactly 12 hours ahead of their European timeline." Rachel's eyes widened as she realized what that meant. 12 hours ahead of Central European time is Japan, Korea, and parts of Eastern China. I finished. They're running a coordinated operation across 2 hemispheres, and the European attacks are designed to draw our attention and resources away from the real target. Mum, what's the real target? I pulled up satellite imagery and economic data on another screen. Tokyo, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, specifically, plus the major banking centers in the financial district. If they can cripple Tokyo's financial infrastructure while European markets are in chaos from the terrorist attacks, they could trigger a global economic collapse that would make 2008 look like a minor recession. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The terrorist attacks in Europe would dominate news cycles and emergency response resources, while the world was focused on the immediate human casualties and infrastructure damage. A coordinated cyber attack on Tokyo's financial systems would go almost unnoticed until it was too late to stop. "Jesus," Rachel breathed. "How many people would die in a global economic collapse?" "Millions, potentially." Economic instability leads to political instability, which leads to conflicts, famines, humanitarian crises. And that's not even counting the immediate impact of the European attacks themselves. Agent Chen had been listening to our conversation, and now she stepped forward with a grim expression. "How much time do we have?" I checked the timeline analysis again, cross-referencing with the communication patterns we'd identified. Based on their synchronization protocols, the European attacks are scheduled to begin in 14 hours, which means the Tokyo operation starts in 2 hours. "Can we warn Tokyo?" Rachel asked. "We can try, but we don't have enough specific intelligence to give them actionable information. And if we're wrong about the targeting, we could be sending them on a wild goose chase while the real attack happens elsewhere." Rachel was already reaching for her secure satellite phone. "I'm calling this in to Director Walsh. We need to alert both Tokyo and European authorities simultaneously, even if we don't have all the details." While Rachel made the call, I continued analyzing the data, looking for any additional clues about the specific targets or attack methods. The communication patterns suggested a high degree of sophistication and coordination, but there were still gaps in our understanding. "Hallie," Agent Chen said quietly, "assuming you're right about all this, what's our best move here in Prague?" I thought about it, weighing our options and the impossible timeline we were working under. "We have 2 choices. We can try to prevent the European attacks, which might save lives here but could allow the Tokyo operation to succeed. Or we can focus on gathering intelligence about the Tokyo operation by capturing operatives here who might have details about the cyber attack. What do you recommend? Before I could answer, Rachel finished her call and rejoined us. Her expression was grim. Director Walsh is mobilizing response teams in both Tokyo and across Europe. But you're right. We don't have enough specific intelligence to give them clear targets. It's going to be a race against time. Which means we need to make a choice here, I said. And I think our best option is to focus on intelligence gathering. If we can capture one of the cell leaders and extract information about the Tokyo operation, we might be able to provide the specifics that the response teams need. Rachel nodded. Which cell do we target? I studied the surveillance data again, looking for indicators of which cell might have the most senior operatives or the best intelligence about the overall operation. Cell Gamma. They're positioned to coordinate between the airport and highway access, which suggests they're handling logistics for the other cells. That means they're likely to have broader knowledge of the operation. Cell Gamma it is, Agent Chen said. I'll coordinate with the tactical team. As the team prepared for what could be the most important operation of our careers, I found myself thinking about the dinner party that had happened less than 12 hours ago. In Victoria's dining room, surrounded by my family's newfound respect and recognition, this mission had felt like a distant concern. Now, with the weight of potentially millions of lives hanging in the balance, that dinner party felt like it had happened in another lifetime. But there was something empowering about the contrast. For the first time in my life, I was walking into a high-stakes operation knowing that the people who mattered to me understood exactly who I was and what I was capable of. I wasn't fighting to prove myself anymore. I was fighting because this was what I did, and I was damn good at it. All right, team, Rachel said, checking her tactical gear one final time. Let's go save the world. Again, I added with a slight smile. Again, she agreed. As we prepared to leave the safe house for what could be the most important mission of our careers, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and purpose that came with operations where everything was on the line. This was why I'd chosen this life. Why I'd walked away from my family's expectations and built something entirely my own. In 18 hours, millions of people would go to sleep safely in their beds, never knowing how close they'd come to disaster, and that was exactly how I liked it. The van pulled out into the Prague night, carrying us toward a confrontation that would determine whether our analysis was correct and whether we could prevent a catastrophe that could reshape the global order. It was Tuesday night in Prague, Wednesday morning in Tokyo, and somewhere in the space between those two time zones, the fate of the modern world was about to be decided by a handful of operatives who'd trained their entire careers for moments exactly like this one. I'd spent 30 years being invisible to my family. Now it was time to be invisible to an enemy who would never see us coming.